So weird, these virtual cons and panels. It's like,
Okay, we're live now.
Oh, wait,
Guys,
we are?
welcome to Diversity Comic Con. This is the DC Comics panel. Before we move on, I just wanted to thank um, the Fashion Institute of Technology for hosting this event, and especially Dr. Joyce Brown, our president, and Dr. Ron Milan, who is our chief diversity officer. Again, this is the Diversity Comic Con at FIT, and today we have our special guests, the team from DC Comics. We have Christian Cooper and Eletha Martinez, and their story, It's a Bird, is the first digital chapter in DC's Represent anthology series of comics, where he teenage boy, into an examination of racial profiling and police brutality. Through the magic and power of graphic storytelling, It's a Bird is both a conversation starter and a thoughtful response to the events that have played out in the public eye over the last few decades. So we have Christian Cooper and Eletha Martinez, and we are joined by Eletha's son, Michael Briar Polson, to moderate. So now, Michael, I will give it to you.
Thank you, Mo. My name is Michael Briar Polson, and I'm the son of Eletha Martinez. And I'm actually very happy to go ahead and be the moderator for this panel, both for her and Christian Cooper. I guess we'll just start us off right away then, I guess. So Christian and Eletha, for anyone who actually only heard of you once through CNN or a single comic book, what is your origin story? And how did you actually start for being an artist and writer and a birder?
Eletha, why don't you go first?
you see, you threw me. I knew that was going to happen. I knew it. Well, my name's Eletha Martinez, and I've been drawing comic books since they let the animals off the ark. I'm 21 years in this business, drawing everything from Iron Man to New 52 Batgirl, this wonderful book, just all this time working. And meanwhile, while I'm doing all this work, I had this kid along the way, which is great, because now he's to take my place in this grand scheme of things in this industry and in the world. And I think it's very, 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 very important that we have this conversation today, because comics have always been a little bit political, a little bit, resonating with the rest of our world. And it's about time that it started to include more diversity, like people like me being the first to walk in the door and go, I want to draw comic books. But they're like, yeah, you're a little, the girl thing isn't really working for us now. But never, never, never pushback from the companies. It's more like the public's not ready for it. So I spent many years without having a real voice within the industry, without really being heard or really being seen. And so it's like slowly coming on and climbing this mountain. So I'm very happy to be here today, 21 years later, still doing this thing.
My origin story is a little more circuitous. Graduated from high school, went on to college, graduated from college, started working in magazine publishing as an editor. And then about 5 years after graduating from college, I don't know if this will happen to you guys, but it happened certainly to me and my friends. This bomb went off, and all of a sudden, everybody from college was getting married to each other, for the most part. And so 5 years out, I'm going with the summer, 5 years out. I think I had 4 weddings that summer. And at all these weddings, of course, you're seeing people you haven't seen in a little while, and you're all catching up. And they're like, oh, so what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, well, I'm working in magazine publishing. But what I really want to do is work in comics. And everybody would look at me and go, well, we knew that freshman year. What took you so long? So at that point, I'm like, okay, well, obviously, I need to make a career change here. So a friend of mine was working at one of the 2 biggest comic book publishers, not DC. And he told me when a job opened up there, and so I applied. And at that point, my resume worked against me because it was an entry-level position, and they all looked at resume, and I think I might have maybe omitted the fact that where I went to college is Harvard University, which is sort of like not exactly considered a breeding ground for comic book writers. So everyone looks at my resume and they're like, oh, no, you're way overqualified for this job. And I had to really sort of talk my way in there. I was like, no, you don't understand. I don't care. I will take a 1/3 salary cut. I will Xerox and Xerox only if that's what it takes, but I want to work here. So they happily took mercy on me, and I got a job as an assistant editor, entry level. I was the submissions editor at the beginning, and submissions editor is a real mean job because people send in work unsolicited, and you have to basically tell them, no, we can't use you, because there's very little opportunity as an unsolicited artist and none as an unsolicited writer to get a job. Some people manage it, but it is very, very hard. And you can just imagine the tidal wave of submissions coming in. So that was my job, to be the shatterer of dreams, basically, and tell people, no, 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 thank you, but no, 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 for a while. And then eventually I moved into other parts of the editorial stable, and was working on titles like Incredible Hulk and Ghostwriter as an assistant editor. And then my writing eventually grew out of that, because that's what I was mainly interested in. And I knew that as a writer, whereas an artist, someone can glance at your work really and get a sense of whether or not you have the artistic chops to be a comic book artist. Of course, there's things you have to learn. Of course, there's things you can learn, but they can tell that you have the basic skills. Much harder with the writer. You can't glance at somebody's written words on a page and know whether or not they can craft a comic book story. So I knew that the quickest way to become a writer was to actually be working there already as an editor. And a lot of, at least back then, a lot of editors became writers and vice versa. So that's what I did. I started writing freelance while I was there working as an assistant editor and then associate editor. Then this big two comic book company went through bankruptcy and laid off 2/3 of the staff, including me. So at that point, I was just freelance writing, which actually suited me just fine, because I happened to, at that point, that publisher got the Star Trek license. And I have been a Star Trek fan since, the womb. So that was tremendous to suddenly be able to have an opportunity to pitch for Star Trek comics, because my mentor at that comic book company actually is the one who was going to be editing the Star Trek comic. So I submitted a proposal for a Star Trek comic series, and mine was the only one that was approved out of the box. They didn't send it back for any changes or anything. They said, yeah, let's do this, let's go. And that was tremendous. So that was sort of a dream come true, and probably the best stretch of a year and a half, almost 2 years, as I was just, getting paid to write Star Trek comics on my laptop as I sit out in the park in the beautiful sunshine and the fresh air. And I'm just thinking, it doesn't get better than this. So that was glorious. But then that comic book company lost the Star Trek license, as things happen. And at that point, right around then, I started doing my own comic, which was an online LGBTQ comic. And this is back before there were online comics, actually. This is going back to 1998. So there weren't, I don't think there were any, or there were very few online comics. And I was struggling to figure out, how am I going to do this? I'm writing the stories. I'm finding pencilers who are willing to work for the pittance I was able to pay them, because I insisted on paying people. I was like, no one's working for free. Everyone's getting paid something, because these are professionals and you pay professionals something. So I'm getting back the pencils. I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this? Because I got to find an inker. And the first issue was inked. And then I realized someone at a party who didn't know anything about comics, I said, yeah, I'm having trouble figuring out how I'm going to do this because I don't have an inker. And they said, why don't you just run it from the pencils? And I'm like, you can't possibly just run it from the pencils. So it wasn't ideal. You want an inker, because an inker adds a whole new dimension. But what I was able to do was scan in the artwork, since it was digital, and I was able to mark off the blacks and boost the blacks of the pencils so that it looked somewhat inked. And that's how we went with the comic. And that went on for a while until I got the opportunity to buy a New York condo apartment, which was a longtime dream of mine. And suddenly I was house poor and no extra cash, and I couldn't pay anybody, at which point I had to shut down the comic. And then that was the end of my comic career, or so I thought. And then It's a Bird came along. And that is the first comic I have written in 20 years.
All right, then. That's a journey.
No,
Sorry, that was a long-winded journey.
No, I was fascinated. I'm like, oh.
All right.
Sorry. And
Well,
I'm going to interrupt you because you mentioned about the language of comics. It's like, as you said, when you're drawing something visually, it's that language. We see it immediately. You either speak it or you don't. You either can do the storytelling or you can't. You either have your anatomy in place or it's not there. And it's something that's like instantaneous because we all speak that language. But with writing, that's a different thing. As you said, you have to that written word down. You have to take time to read it. But there is one thing that we would love to pick your brain about. It's the strength to pitch. While you might not have the visual, you have the voice. And with that voice, you have the strength to pitch, to talk, to be able to, communicate what you want, focused like a laser. Whereas artists, we're like, when someone comes and says, "What's this book about?" We go, "Just write the book. Don't ask me any questions." We just don't have the voice.
Well, you're right. And that's part of the reason why I think writers and pencilers make such a great team, because we bring different strengths. Comics is a collaborative process. It is the writer, the penciler, the inker, the colorist, and the editor. But you're all bringing a different skill, but particularly the writer and the penciler bring, one brings a sort of plot-driven, what is the character arc, an ability to sell things through words, as you mentioned, and the other brings a complete sense of the visual, an ability to take those words and put them on the page in a way that is dramatic and bold and dynamic, even though nothing's moving, but you give a sense of motion, you communicate motion through what you draw. So it's a great collaboration. It's really a wonderful process.
It is.
When it works.
When
it doesn't, it's not good.
Let's not talk about the train wrecks. The wreck. Michael, just stop us from talking about the train wrecks. Stop us.
The train wrecks we have all been in. It's like,
well, then let's go ahead and crack in another question, shall we?
Yes. Stop it.
Mm-hmm. All right, then, Ma. So tell us about your experiences as a comic book artist. So, let's see.
That's a broad, sweeping question. Experience as a comic book artist. Thank goodness it's something that keeps changing and keeps evolving. Every time I think I'm going to get this is my year to coast. This is a good year. Oh no, you're just talking about the train wrecks. Every day is a comic book day, including this year we've had pandemic. So we're up with zombie attack just about. We're waiting for the asteroid to come and get us. So all these things begin to influence my ability to just sit quietly and draw. And you would think now that we're basically sequestered in our homes and we've been here a while that you have time to draw more. You have no, life is even more congested because I divide my time between drawing and teaching at SVA as well. So I have to do 2 classes a week, prepare for that. Sit down, draw the rest of the time. So if you're talking about a daily, what's it like being a comic book artist? It's like living in a comic book. You get up, you get dressed, you put on a nice t-shirt, and you just pray you can hold on for the ride. But throughout the whole career, all these years, it's been like something that's evolving and changing. I'm starting to get a voice, starting to be able to speak, but at the same time, it's with a lot of pushback. So as beautiful as this DC represent is, it's wonderful and I feel safe within my company, safe within my community, but the public reaction was something I was not prepared for. While it's mainly positive, you do get the weird confessions of crimes and things like that from people I've never met before. Yeah, that was fun. After had that a couple of times hitting my SVA email, you get people wondering, well, why didn't they get a guy to draw this? As if I'm not a part of the fabric of the world and I do not experience this type of, terribleness on a daily basis. In fact, we have people of color, we walk around with armor on, sort of praying that nothing happens to us, and hopefully we can be bulletproof when we go outside. My son, I fear for him very greatly. So all of this influences my time at the desk, because I have to put that all aside and somehow still make the characters look great when we draw them, hopefully, yeah. And clearing your mind, trying to get back to the basic language we speak as comic book artists. But that's like my immediate. If you're talking about years and years and all that pile of stuff, that went from me not knowing what I was doing and just holding on, as my first person who hired me to do anything says, it's just going to be a trial by fire. And I'm like, what does that mean? It's like, oh yeah, it was. It means you're hitting the ground running and it has to be perfect every time. You don't get do-overs, not that many. They'll tell you to change something, but you're like perfect off the bat. So I like when new people ask me, well, what did you get to change? What did you get to think about? Nothing. You get that script, you better get it right. And that's the end of it. But again, I don't want to frighten anybody. I want people to enjoy doing this wonderful career, right? Right, Christian? Tell them.
No, absolutely. I it's
all right. Allergies are getting me.
I'm going to talk about it obviously from the writer's perspective. What to answer the same question? I assume, Michael, I should answer the same question. What is it like, or what the process is? So I'll go ahead.
Let's see. One question for you was, were you approached by DC to do this?
Yes, I was, actually. Two folks who I had worked with way back in the day when I was at the other comic book company were now working at DC. Very close friends of mine, and we'd stayed in touch over the many years. And when the incident in Central Park happened, with me sort of at the epicenter, they approached me a little while later, and they said, well, do you want to do a comic book about your experiences? And I'm like, a comic book about this? It's not exactly superhero stuff. So I kind of thought about it. I was trying to think about it from different angles. And then they came back to me and they said, okay, well, we have a title. And I'm like, okay, what's the title? And they said, It's a Bird. And it took me a second. I was like, it's a bird. Oh, I see what you did there. And once they gave me the title, the rest just flowed. It was really fascinating how just sort of like this floodgate of how I wanted to tell, what story I wanted to tell and how I wanted to tell it just kind of flowed out of me based just from that little spark of that title, It's a Bird. I knew where I wanted it to go, and I was able to then craft the story. And I think that's the first thing for somebody as a writer. I don't know how many writers there are out there, because I know this is FIT, so there may be mostly artists. But as a writer, the first thing is you've got to have something to say. You've got to have something that you're passionate about, that you want to communicate in a way that's different, that's clear. And so that's the first thing as a writer. You've got to have something to say. And I did. So then it was a matter of finding the way to say it. And once I had the idea of what I wanted to do, then I had to pull back. And I find I do this as a writer. I don't know if every writer does that, but I had to disentangle myself from the emotions of the story. Not that I was trying to make the story less emotional, but in order to communicate on the page what I wanted the penciler to do, I had to think mechanically. I had to think, okay, I need some space here. I need some breathing room here. I need this to be dramatic. This is where the page turn is going to go. And this is the central MacGuffin of how this story is going to be told. And I don't know exactly how that's going to be visually, but this is what I'm kind of seeing in my head. And you got to communicate all of that to the penciler concisely, effectively. And if you get a good penciler, they take that and they not only get what you're trying to communicate, but they add something to it. And I experienced that when I was working on the Star Trek comic. I happened to be working primarily with a penciler named Chris Renaud, who actually would go on to create the for Despicable Me, the Minions. So he went on to do that, which is like fantastic. But back then he was just a regular old comic book penciler, and I would write these Star Trek plots, and he was a Star Trek fan too, as it turns out. I would write these Star Trek plots and I would send it off to him. And when the pencils came back, there would be things on the page that I had in my head, but I hadn't necessarily put into the plot. And yet there they were on the page. And that was the best writer-artist collaboration I ever had up until now when I worked with Eletha. Because Eletha gave me that same kind of feedback that, okay, yeah, this is what's in my head, and I'm getting back on the page not only what I put in the plot of the script, but what was also sort of in my head, the subconscious idea and more. So that's what you want as a writer, and that's kind of the technique as a writer. But anyway, so that's what happened. DC came to me. They said, "Hey, let's do this," and I'm like, "I don't know if we can think of a way." They gave me a title, and then my brain just took the title and ran with it, and came up with the basic idea of the binoculars as the magical element that opens up the story.
All right, so Ma, how long did it actually take you to draw the story?
Well, this one I kind of took my time with. Usually I don't get a lot of time. You know, it's comics. It's like hit the ground and you just run and you hang on, like, you know, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. But this one had a lot. It didn't really give like this is when it needs to be in. So once I got it, you know, I got to live with it for just a little bit to read it, because I realized, as Christian said, it's not superheroes. We're really going to have to, you know, how am I going to approach this? How am I going to handle this? How can I be respectful toward this? So drawing, I usually draw at a page-a-day pace, a little bit faster. This one, I think it took like a page and a half a day. And then on some pages were heavier than others. So I might have skipped pages, because once I can have the script in my mind, it becomes a movie. And movie just replays, it gets stronger and stronger every single time I take another pass at it. So it doesn't matter if I start from page 1 to me or page 10. I know there's some editors are rigid, like, oh my God, do every single page in order. I don't see it that way. Sometimes, you know, the opening is stronger. Sometimes the very end of it's stronger. And I try not to draw the last page first. But there have been times, like with this one, I saw the last page, literally. I'm like, I know what I've got to do here. So I waited and just walked toward it, trying to get through the others that were like, because some of them were kind of rough, because you're trying to draw real people, their likenesses, and you're trying to be respectful of what happened. And then you're trying to imagine the scene that no one saw. Some of them we did see. And then the one scene that the whole world saw, I made sure in the day that was happening, and I knew where it was going just by the sound of his voice. I did not watch it. And then to have that happen, and then weeks later to get this project, and then now I'm forced to confront this terrible thing that really just changed the fabric of our America right now, you know, like have us so outraged that we can't take it. So I'm looking at it, so how long did it take me? I honestly don't know from start to finish how long it took me. It wasn't running over my normal amount of time to draw a comic, but emotionally, it definitely took me a bit longer. It's something that I usually, like Chris said, you draw and you write above the board, like playing Dungeons and Dragons. You are not your character. You were just using parameters to move this. But this one, because of so much extra thought had to go into it, you literally fall into a funny little time vacuum. Like, I am not able to think about it in, okay, I've spent 4 hours at the desk. I'm getting up now. I'm going to do something else, come back 6 more hours, get up and do something else now. No, it wasn't like that at all. It's like, let's draw the little birds today because we're happy. And then, Chris, you taught me things about birds. Like, okay, so this is a male bird, this is a female bird, and this bird over here is, all of a sudden I'm doing all this extra research. And lining it up and say, he said, they better color this properly because this little red bird looks just like this little yellow bird. Oh my goodness. So poor Emilio, I know he worked, and Mark Morales, our inker, I love him so much, but I think I tried to kill him with all the trees.
The trees.
Yeah, I apologize for the trees.
The leafiness was driving him nuts.
It's like, yeah, but it's a park, and I gotta go through the park. So, you know, I was having fun drawing all the little leaves, and then it's like, yeah, there's a lot of leaves. Oh, okay.
Well,
So
that's one of the nice things about the story too, I think, is the juxtaposition of sort of the tranquility of the leafy green parts, and then the crimson violence that gets juxtaposed in there. So
yeah. And then how in certain, as I said, certain scenes we were not there for. So just to have to sit there and imagine, like, and it's not like this is somebody that's a superhero or somebody that that should know better than to live in Metropolis or Gotham. I don't know why those two cities are populated at all. No one should be there. It should just be empty, like Disney World. You leave after a certain hour, just let things happen there, and then you come back in the morning and go to work. I don't know why people live there, but unlike that, this happened to real people. So you have to be respectful of those moments and just try to figure out how to relate that so it's not something that's like, comic book heavy with, look at this bombastic scene. It has to be quiet and yet still poignant. So yeah, that was something, all right.
And one of the things I got to say, Eletha, that you did so well, why you're probably the perfect person for this particular story, is your mastery of facial expression, because that was so key in the telling of the story. I didn't want to have to freight this story with too many words, too many word balloons, too many thought balloons. It was supposed to kind of tell itself, but that required, facial expressions that you could interpret, that you could understand what the person was feeling. And a lot of artists, especially in the superhero genre, are not particularly good at that. So, that was your strength, one of your strengths that you brought to this. And it really makes the story, in my humble opinion.
Yours is the main opinion, because you brought as I said, I had to be able to see your script, and I could. It was a movie playing in my head. And luckily I have a teenager, and I've seen many of those facial expressions under very many conditions. And just being able to, I look at my son and say, he reminds me so much of Jules, because unfortunately, as I said, you have to walk around with armor, and we live in this world, and you're going to run into something. And particularly this face, I saw this face at an airport on my child's face when we were stopped trying to come back from North Carolina to New York after a convention. There is no reason to do that to us, but we were. Why? Because I guess they decided we were too exotic. So they asked me where we were from, and I'm like, New York. No, where are you from? And I realized they're looking at my boarding pass with my hyphenated name. They see Michael's name, and it just started a whole, well, can you try to get my purse from me, try to separate my child from me? And I watched him go from, much like Jules in the story, from this sort of, yeah, we're coming home from a con, innocent thing, and where are we going next week, to fear. And then from fear to nervousness when they actually call, it's like who's your contact person? My contact person. I'm a grown up. I don't need a contact person to fly. And my son immediately hit a sort of panic at this point, going, if they call Abby, it's like, don't worry, then we're just gonna get a ticket to Honduras if they call Abby, because you call her number and it seems like a New York number, but no, it's a digital number that hits up to Honduras. So one of the things we don't have, and my family was very, very, very adamant about, is that when we open our mouth, they did not want where we came from to be heard. They would use the words perfect American English my whole life. So that even though I came into the country at 12, coming from Curacao, you're speaking other languages. I'm communicating with my brothers in Dutch and Papiamento, very little Spanish, but they did not, she didn't want that heard. So you're in speech therapy, you're in this, you speak English when you're in this country. They did not want, when they open our mouth, to be able to say, this is another mark against you. You've already got all these other points going on, but this we don't want for you, which is a way different thinking than how it is today. Now you have room to be diverse and different and be yourself. But growing up as a child, coming here, me, my brothers and I, the rest of my cousins, being the first children of immigrants born in this country, they wanted us to have every advantage possible. I did not see it, and I still don't see it as a true advantage to be stripped of your heritage that way. But at the same time, I could understand more so, because of what's still taking place in our society here, why my grandmother particularly made that choice. Because you got to remember, she didn't come to this country in this happy time. She was a 40-year-old woman at the end of segregation, coming from Honduras, where she wasn't living like this. She was a seamstress there. She became a nurse here. So you can imagine what that took, that strength it took, what you had to ignore, what you had to go through. So she was only trying to make it better for us, her descendants, to come here and say, at least when you open your mouth, they won't know where you came from. You're going to be able to speak perfect American English, like as if that was a shield to protect us. And then Michael and I ended up in a situation where there was no shield, where they're literally trying to put us back where we came from. And I watched my child go from an innocence to an anger, and then to a point of having to accept it, because one of the things I could say my grandmother always taught us is that you're a warrior. You have to keep going. You have no choice. So you get up and you keep walking. You don't get to wallow. You don't get to lie in whatever. You keep going because you're here. This is your time. Be alive. And so what are you going to do with it?
And Eletha, what you were talking about that panel, if I hope we can navigate back to it, that one right there with that expression on his face, that's a really good example of that collaborative process that's part of making comics. Because sure, I wrote that Jules should, have a certain facial expression, but what I got back, that's Eletha. That's all her. She brought that to it. She had that experience. She remembered what was on Michael's face at that moment, and she put it onto the page to the point where you notice there's no words on that panel at all because it didn't need it. And I wasn't going to clutter it up or ruin the moment with a lot of words because that expression tells the whole story right there. So that's the collaboration when the writer and the penciler are in sync. That's what you get.
So speaking of the story, those binoculars, have they seen a lot in that terms?
Have the binoculars seen a lot? That's sort of an open question as presented by the comic. When I wrote it, I had this idea. Everything in the story springs from something real, even though it's a very magical, realist story where all sorts of strange, magical things are happening. All of it is grounded in reality. The binoculars that I was wearing when I had my racist run in Central Park were a gift from my dad for my 50th birthday. Yeah, I'm old. If the gray hair didn't give me away. Were a gift from my dad. And so I wanted to communicate that idea of sort of intergenerational transmittal of knowledge, of caring, of blackness. And so that's why that's another reason why I made Jules a teenager, because I thought it was important, first of all, to make it relatable to young people, and because I wanted Jules to be a character who starts from a kind of flippant, naive point of view, and then he goes through this journey, and by the end of it, he's not flippant and naive anymore. But the binoculars were a part of that. The binoculars being handed down to him from his father from his grandfather via his father. The idea of intergenerational caring and transmission of knowledge and of a certain degree of power. I wanted that to be in the story. So that's sort of what the binoculars represent indirectly. And then, of course, there's the special power they have, which is that they show things beyond what is seen just through the visible spectrum. They allow him, because they've seen war and seen civil war in the civil rights movement, because they've witnessed what Black folk went through in the civil rights movement, they can summon these spirits. They can see these events. And that's really what the binoculars were for. They were the conceit of the story that let us weave these two seemingly unrelated things together. The experience of a Black kid going birding, and then all the violence that has fallen on so many Black people, fatal violence in these cases. And they wouldn't seem to match up. And yet underneath both of them, hopefully the story makes clear, is the same vein of systemic underlying racial bias, and how in the cases of the three people we see, Amadou Diallo, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, it had fatal consequences, but also how it impacts Jules and how he's just trying to go birding on public land, and some crazy old white dude is out there saying, "Get off my lawn," So it shows how all of it is woven together, hopefully, and that's kind of what the binoculars were for. They were our way to enter this world and weave these two stories together.
Okay. Well, another follow-up question from a student is, why did Jules choose to turn away from the confrontation?
That was real important to me, because that was my way of saying it's not about her. And I can't say that enough. It's not about the crazy white lady. It is about those we have lost and how we keep from losing any more. Don't let anybody distract you from that. I don't care how much their gums are flapping, how much they're screaming and yelling about law and order and about how, Antifa or whatever they're getting themselves worked up about. Don't let them distract you. This is about those we have lost and how we keep from losing anymore. And that's why he tunes her out, because she doesn't matter. And he turns his back to her. And it's funny, when the lettering came back, the balloons for the next panel or two were all the same size originally. And I had specifically said in the script, I'm like, no, these words get smaller and smaller. They diminish as she diminishes, as the importance diminishes. And so we sent it back to the letterer, and the second time around, he got it. And he has those word balloons where she's just going on and on. You don't get to turn your back on me, blah, 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 blah. And she, it's like, eventually it becomes like the Charlie Brown voice of adults. Meaningless. Nothing. Background noise. And he turns and he looks at what matters, which is those folks we lost.
All right, then. So, Ma, how personal does it actually feel to, creating a story like this based on real-world events?
As I said, you had to be very careful in the approach, because it involved, real experiences and people that are no longer with us. So you can't handle that with a heavy hand or just charge forward like it's a superhero story, regular. And yet, to me, it was very much as I'm looking at the pages side by side, I'm realizing now, because I'm one of those people that don't like to look at their work. So once it's drawn, it's like I never look back, darling. It distracts from the now. So I could say out of all the works I've done, this is probably the one I've seen the most. And when I look at it and see them lined up like that, I'm going with the black, that feeling of, it worked the way I wanted it to work. That feeling of how you're confined, and this is like a darkness that's underneath. So you have all this beautiful brightness, this being able to roam with just the visual, the way it came together for me in seeing it. It's like, okay, so it did work. Because sometimes when you're drawing, you're not 100% sure, because you can only handle one little part. Christian wrote it. I have the script. Somebody else will ink it. Somebody else will color it. Somebody else will letter it. And then sometime I get back work and it doesn't look anything like what I drew it. I'm like, what? I have had people hand me books at shows and I go, I didn't draw that. It's like, yes, you did. Your name's right here. I'm like, oh, who did this to me? but not with this one. I mean, just when I saw the way the faces were colored, when I saw the way, like certain panels I came so close, and because they didn't need any more, they didn't need words. They didn't need to be, oh, let me show you this whole terrible scene. It was just enough. And then that black, because I wanted to convey that feeling of how we feel to walk around in the world. You're happy and bright, but you never know. It'll sneak up on your back. Somebody can just face you. But what will you do? How will you react to it? Are you going to do what? Break into violence? Or, as you say, going to get on with your life? You're going to do what you have to do. And when the time comes, do what you really have to do. Vote, get out there to make changes happen, to make it better, so that we don't have to see things like this anymore, and we don't have terrible stories to tell anymore.
And if I can just jump in to say, we've given, go back. If I can give a shout out, we've already given a shout out to Mark Morales, the penciler, the inker, hello, brain. But we need to give a shout out to Emilio Lopez, who was the colorist. Because, I mean, if you look at that panel where the shading on Jules's face just sort of amplifies what Eletha as the penciler, gave him in that expression. So, and he just the way Emilio did the contrast between the greens of the beautiful, lush, tranquil pages and the reds of the violent pages. He did a magnificent job. So again, the collaborative process of making comics comes shining through here, where it's not just the writer and just the penciler. It's the writer, it's the penciler, it's the inker, it's the colorist, and then hopefully you get something that's meaningful out of the end of the process.
All right. So let's go and continue on with this kind of question. Based on the fact that it was inspired by real events, was this also your first intentional Black story? And how did it actually feel, telling the story now in 2020?
It wasn't my first intentionally Black story. I sort of along very similar lines, a very different story, but it was in many ways a Black Lives Matter story before there was Black Lives Matter. Must have been about 97, 96. I wrote a story called Skin, which was in Midnight Suns Unlimited #2. And it is set in the Darkhold universe. At the time I had created and was writing a horror comic called Darkhold. And right about that time, the Rodney King verdict came out. Now, I don't know how a lot of you folks are young, but the Rodney King verdict was there were these 4 cops who were wailing on them, 4 white cops who were wailing on this Black guy with their batons and knocking the life out of him, even though he's already crumpled and down on the ground. And this got caught on video. This was in Los Angeles. And these cops got brought up on charges, and they all, even though there was a video documenting the whole thing, they all got acquitted. And there was just this rage in me, and I think anyone who's ever walked around in a brown skin. And I had to channel it into something. So I wrote this story, Skin, which is about this cop who makes it his business to wail on brown-skinned people and what happens to him as a result. Because Darkhold is a horror comic, and horrible things happen to horrible people in horror comics. So I will not say more, but if you can seek it out, maybe you'll be able to find it and read it. But so that was a Black story, if you want, that I had done before this.
Well, we only have 15 minutes left, so we're going to ask some conclusion questions from the students, all right? So, Mom, what was your ultimate dream comic book too? And Christian, you can answer it too.
Oh, don't get me started. I've drawn just about everybody. Just about, except there are 2. There are 2 that I need to complete my full circle. Well, no, there's 3, but as you said, there's 1 we can mention, but I need to draw Superman one day. I honestly do need to draw Superman one day, need to draw Wonder Woman one day. And that would complete my circle, my journey through comics. But why Superman? Because it's Superman. Oh my God. But because not a lot of women, or if any, have gotten to draw Superman. So I think that's a good mountain. That's another one to plant a flag on. And just because, when you're young and you're outside the country, you don't get exposed to a lot of these kind of superhero things. I mean, we're watching Flintstone and Dallas. And you're only allowed to watch Dallas from their yard because they're not going to, they don't want you in the house. So you come back to the country and you see this explosion. I mean, they've got all these heroes and it's so wonderful. And what are you hearing as truth, justice, and the American way? Because, when you're outside the country, back in that day, now it's different. Michael and I travel internationally, and we are definitely seen in this 2020 era as maybe crazy savages here. It's not the same. They don't uphold us as some place to go for opportunity anymore. And they're upholding all these moral values. Yeah, we've lost that. Comics gives us a sheen of that. And I would like to visit Superman with that feeling that I had when I was a child and first seeing this wonderful immigrant character that stands no matter what, and stands and fights for little people like me. So of course, that's why I got to have him.
Oh my goodness, I never thought of that Superman is an immigrant.
Yep.
Wow. Nice. How did I not think of that before?
He's the ultimate immigrant.
Yeah, there you go.
He is extraterrestrial, isn't he?
Oh.
He's an anchor baby.
Mike, control us.
That's
Control.
not right.
What was the question again, Michael?
What was your ultimate dream comic book project?
Oh, that's easy. X-Men. You know, X-Men for me, because I'm Black, because I'm gay, so I'm sort of the double minority thing. And the X-Men story is all about, you know, the minority experience, how, you know, you are feared and hated and persecuted for something you have no control over, and yet you transcend that to do your best in the world and make the world better for other people. And so to be able to tell stories that have that basic concept underlying them, that would be awesome.
All right. That's nice. That's a nice one.
You know, when you're drawing X-Men, I've drawn them, but they're part of that beautiful crowd where they've got to be so poised you can't even get their costumes torn, and they're not as much fun as when you can roll them around in the dirt.
Yeah, but you know, some of my favorite X-Men stories are the ones where they're not in costume, where they're running around in sort of normal street clothes, but still demonstrating these enormous powers, you know? And to me, that juxtaposition, you know, you see people in spandex tights. Yeah, they're supposed to have awesome powers. But to see people in sort of ordinary street clothes who, like, you know, okay, my goddess, Storm, who, you know, I'm going back to the Claremont Byrne era here of X-Men, but there are panels where, you know, she's doing something normal. She's shopping for clothes, trying on clothes, looking fabulous because she's Storm. And then, you know, the Guardian from Alpha Flight attacks them. And suddenly the room grows dark and her eyes grow stormy and her face takes on this dark cast and there's energy crackling around her. And she's still in, you know, that fabulous skirt and that fabulous blouse. But man, you know, you are dealing with a goddess. And, you know, it's stuff like that that's kind of cool to look at.
All right, so let's bring it back now. That was good, actually. All right. So what words of advice you actually have for up-and-coming artists and writers?
Well, here, I'll start with that one. I'll tell when I say it all the time, because I tell people that you have to draw every day. You draw whether you're sick or well, and you plan to draw on your deathbed. Why? Because you have to build the stamina to draw. You have to build the discipline to draw. And at the end of the day, if there is no one, and no one's ever going to read your work, no one's ever going to see your work, would you still draw? If the answer is yes, well, go ahead, take this chance, because this is a 1% club. And it's not just about being a good artist. It's not just about being a consistent artist. You have to be a strong artist. You don't have the luxury to say, I can't, or I cannot handle something. No, you don't, because you have a whole army behind you ready to take. You are literally an expendable soldier in this. So if you want to stay, the strength comes first. Before you even show your portfolio to anyone else, make sure you are strong within yourself, meaning I know myself. Do not make excuses for your work. You hand in your work and it's like, yes, isn't this wonderful? This is fabulous. It's the best that you've ever seen, right? You don't even have to say it. You just exude that. That means you have to have a good mask. Don't you love our masks? They're great, right? Underneath, I might be crying on this bed after I've read some scripts. I'm like, I don't want me to draw this. But you get up, you draw it, you do it. So you start now. Start in doing that. Practice that now. So that by the time you're out there, you're showing your work, you're standing at a bench and someone say, what's this about? You have a good mask. You're ready. You're armored up. You're ready.
I already gave my first bit of advice, which is know what you want to say. Have something meaningful to you that you need to express. That's the first thing I would say to a writer. The second thing I would say to a writer is consume. Read books, watch movies, watch television, watch storytelling of a nature that you find interesting. But you know, go broad. Look at all kinds. Go as broad as possible. Metabolize those stories. Understand what it is about them that moved you, and how those stories were constructed so that they moved you. One thing I flashed to, I actually drew on this when I was writing a comic book. It was when I was writing the horror comic book Darkhold, and I had to have a moment where one character is seducing a pure character into evil, into an act of evil. And I thought about a movie I had seen years before, which was Little Shop of Horrors, which is a comedy musical with Steve Martin and all that. But there's a scene in there where a character is seducing another character into evil. And they have these three girls through the whole movie who are sort of the Greek chorus. But at that moment, where most of the time they're funny and they're cute and they're perky, at that moment when that guy is is being seduced into evil, you never see their faces through the whole scene. Or in all the other scenes, you saw their faces when they're singing and dancing. In that scene, you see their gloves, you see their footsteps, you see the way they move, you see their spangly gown, but you never see their faces. And that to me was, I didn't realize how powerful that was until I went back and I thought about it. And I used that in that scene when I was writing that scene where a character is seducing this pure character into evil. As he's seducing her, you never see his face. You see him, his hands, you see him moving around her, trying to draw her in, but you never see his face. So that's why you want to metabolize stories from all over the place, because they will be tools, they will teach you, they will be resources for you to use later.
That actually is very nice. I'm going to keep that with myself. All right. So with 6 minutes, 5 minutes actually. So how can we manage bias or hate in 2020 now? Go on. Good answer.
It's hard. There's a lot of work we all have to do, particularly white people. And, I'm not saying this to be mean. I'm saying it because we can't, as we black people can't fix this. We can't make life better for us in this way on this issue. You white people have to tackle these underlying biases that you're subjected to. But the most immediate thing we can do to tackle racism and bias is get the white nationalist out of the White House on November 3rd. That's first and foremost. That's what we can do, all of us, right away. So vote like your life depends on it, because it does.
Yeah, I heard tell that only like 60% of us did not vote last term. That's terrible. That's why we're stuck with this crazy person. I don't know about you, but if he leaves the White House quietly, that would be the best I can hope for. But I kind of think he's going to grease himself up and run around there, and they're going to chase him. It'll be something that we get to tape, and I will tell all my friends, watch this. Yeah, we'll get to see that. It's like, but does it stop when we drive this one out? Is he truly this? Was he the catalyst, or was he just this underlying voice? I know. Come on, it's going to happen.
We're laughing, but we're crying on the inside.
Yeah, we are. I can't. We're going to be so embarrassed when we go home.
And I'm sorry, you young people in particular, because like I said, I'm old. You young people in particular, you have got to get engaged politically. You have got to vote. You've got to get your family on the right side of history and get them to vote. You gotta do it. You got to get moving on these things. I don't want to hear any more excuses. You're old enough to vote. You should be voting every single election. Every single election. Don't just wait for the presidential elections. Every single election. It makes a huge difference.
Yes, and take a look at our history too, and think about the way history is being taught to you and what's being kept from you. I see people, they're very surprised. They hear of Tulsa. They said, "Oh, what happened in Wilmington, Virginia?" And you don't realize these things are still happening now. You got to look like, as again, I'll go back to the old immigrant thing. When you are forced to come to this country and you become an American, they make you study American history. So my grandmother got a different view of it. It's not something that's taught here. You take it for granted, and you go, "I don't know what I don't know." Or it seems like, did you know what they did here? Yes, we know what they did in Rosewood. But notice it's the same thing. It's cyclical. It's still happening. It's still happening. Why? Because ultimately, when you're talking Republican, you're talking Democrat, you're not talking about this is not Star Wars and we're dealing with the Republic and these kind of weird things. They're on each side. You have to understand your history. You have to look and open your eyes, because now you think it's going to get fixed just because we get a Democrat in the White House. You think that's going to fix this problem we're having right now? You think that's going to stop the next person from being shot on the street? Or what will stop this? That we have to change these laws. You have to change yourself. We cannot allow this prejudice anymore, period. It can't happen. And if you think, oh, just because they're deaf, they don't have, you got to think about it. That whole Law and Order, and the big part that gave a huge change to the way people are criminalized and policed on the street started with Bill Clinton. He's the one who kind of pushed that forward, and he apologized for that agenda that is now hurting so many. But who's going to get in there and change it? Who's going to say no more? Let's stop this, change this law, make it different. Remember, they work for us. They are not our dictators. We are not in North Korea, right? We don't have to worry about that. We don't like them. You get them out, and you know how. Please do.
All right. Let's see. We have enough time for maybe 2 more questions, but
time flew right by. What happened?
I know, right? It's crazy.
It's all right. Good now.
Because we both go blah 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 blah. You get us going, wind us up, and we can't stop.
Hey, it's great. It's a good
Yeah.
All right. So some of the audience is asking, is it possible to buy a copy of It's a Bird? And another question is there going to be more anthology series like it in 2021? So feel free.
I don't think there's a plan for a print edition of It's a Bird at the moment. It's free digitally. I don't know what the plans are for print editions going down the line. And Represent is the anthology comic. It's going to continue in 2021 with other voices, other writers, other pencilers telling their meaningful stories. So yeah, keep your eye on Represent, see what they're doing next. I was talking, the folks who approached me, approached somebody else, they were telling me, and I have no idea who it was, but it was sort of an exciting prospect that they are moving forward with this idea. So.
Yeah, it's not just one voice, it's many voices. We all just had, we're all going to start singing in unison. I would hope my son's an aspiring writer, and so you've been valuable for him. He's like listening, riveted. He's like, oh, this is what he wants to do. This is it. But then I think you're opening his eyes that it's not just about, comics or horror or these. It's the entire world. It's the whole thing. You have to somehow hear your voice out of all of this. So I think that's so valuable for these young people to hear, because there's one of them right there, and he's going to ask me a million questions about this later. It's just so much you want to know, so much we want to learn, and so much you have to say. So I'm glad, and I hope they do continue this, because, we've been keeping a lot bottled up inside. You keep smiling behind that mask, but you're screaming in your head. And this is our time to say, look, we all have this, and we can learn from this, and don't turn away from it.
And I think in the chat there was something about shout-outs to comic book artists or birders or comic book writers who we idolize. And I will give mine to a comic book artist, Alan Moore. I am not worthy. I am not worthy. You are the god of comic book writers. There we go. That's my shout-out.
Well, you can't follow that up. I'm actually shocked. I'm like, oh. I've gotten on this project to work with an inker that I have been wanting to work with for my whole career, because he literally represents the mountaintop to me. That's when you know you've arrived as an artist, when they pair you with the best. So getting to work with all these, to be a part of something like this, where I'm working with Mark Morales, Emilio Lopez, Christian Cooper, seeing, and yet it's like, this is what you're capable of. When you have time, when you have a team that cares, it's like, oh my God, why couldn't this be like 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Why? It feels so good to be a part of something where you're actually able to look at your work and be proud of what you've done. So I thank the rest of the team. Thank you, Christian, for your wonderful, wonderful script, for just having that focus. For Mark Morales, can never say enough, can never say enough. And Emilio Lopez, look at the colors. That's it. Oh, and there's some scene they did not show you that were like, that's where the power was when you see that. I'm like, oh my goodness. Yep, that's my shout out.
All right. So
Back at you, Eletha.
2 minutes, and it's a wrap up now. Any final thoughts you want to say for these last 2 minutes?
Guys, work on your craft. We want to hear your stories now. We want to be able someday to read your stories out there and have you change the world, hopefully, with the stories you tell. So yeah, hone your craft.
Yep. Keep charging these gates. The fight's not over. I always say I need someone to pick up my sword when I fall. So please Keep drawing, keep writing, keep creating, keep flooding our market. Let us hear your voice. Let us see your stories. It's time to talk.
Well, I guess that's it. So if you want to say something else crazy, then go on then.
Hey guys, thank you very much. That was a great panel discussion. Before we go offline, I just wanted to thank some other people. I wanted to thank Jennifer Fuglevan over at DC for putting this all together, and for Clark Bowl, who also helped her. But most of all, I'd like to thank Marie Javens. I emailed her a few weeks ago, told her about this event, and she just totally got the ball rolling. And so, Marie, thank you very much. And thank you guys. Michael, you did a great job. Eletha, Christian, thank you very much on behalf of FIT and the Diversity Comic Con.
Thank you for having us.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.